Welcome to the Atlanta Falcons Daily Fantasy Team Preview. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay. Taking a look at an Atlanta team last year that was pretty focused on, really two players. For me, in my opinion, that Matt Ryan's a pretty bland fantasy quarterback in terms of daily. But obviously you had Julio Jones and Devonta Freeman, who, at times last week were the highest scorers on the board.
Well, I kind of see this as quarterbacks just have bad years sometimes, whether it's injuries or their offense is transitioning through losing players. And I think Roddy White's steep decline really affected this Falcons offense for the last few years, as well as losing Tony Gonzalez. They kind of lost those pieces without really recovering anything. And yes, Julio Jones is absolutely incredible, but he is only one piece. And as we've seen, you need multiple pieces to truly be a dominant offense. So I actually think we see a better season from Matt Ryan. They did add some nice pieces this offseason. I expect the running game to be better. And I think we see Matt Ryan get back to sort of that 27 to 30 passing touchdowns we saw the last 6 years prior. So in terms of DFS, yeah, he's still going to be pretty bland, but I think there's going to be more upside than last year for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point with the secondary weapons that are starting to kind of creep in here. Because, you look at last year, 21 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. He threw for 4,500 yards, but what good is that when you're not really, finding the end zone? I would love to see him get into that 30 touchdown range. I think that'd be a nice number. Obviously, that would be a nice number because that means Julio Jones is scoring touchdowns, and same thing with Sanu. As far as the tight end situation goes, as you mentioned, the departure of Tony Gonzalez from a few years ago definitely hasn't. No one's really stepped up into that role. You have Jacob Tamme there. You have a couple of guys behind him. Could you see anything emerging there for a nice third target for Ryan?
So I look at what happened with Clive Walford and the Oakland Raiders last year, where he didn't really have a role early in the season, but they slowly progressed his snaps as the season went on. I think that's something that could happen with Austin Hooper, obviously the third rounder out of Stanford. I kind of expect him to have a role by the end of the season, not a necessarily significant or week-to-week DFS role, but in a way, he could be that nice min-punt tight end play that you need to pay up for the Julio and Odell Beckham combination by week 14 or something like that. So definitely something I'm going to be aware of. As you mentioned, Jacob Tamme's still there. Should see 70 to 80 targets if things go as they should. As you mentioned as well, Mohamed Sanu there, signed as a free agent. That should take up quite a few targets. But overall, yeah, tight end's not going to be a prominent receiver there this year.
No, definitely not. You look at last year as far as the passing targets go, there was no second wide receiver option. You run through the list here: Julio Jones 213, Devonta Freeman 102, then you had Jacob Tamme 79, and Roddy White at 73. There was no help as far as a wide receiver role on the opposite side of Jones, and obviously he did his best despite that. But it's like if you have a secondary piece, I do feel like his ceiling is just much more higher.
Yeah, and I give Roddy White the credit he deserves. Last year was not Roddy White. It was the ghost of Roddy White. That is not the Roddy White I know or am going to remember when he retires, which, God, I hope he does. But they're going to be better. Replacement level is better than what he was last year, unfortunately. So I think Justin Hardy in year 2 could be a nice little guy in the slot there for dump offs and stuff like that. So overall, I just think it's going to be better for Matt Ryan. More of the same in the passing game with Julio and maybe some nice weeks from Sanu. But yeah, overall, it's going to be Julio.
Yeah, obviously you look at Julio Jones. 35% of the passing targets last year, 213 altogether. Obviously if you want to criticize him, it was because he only had 8 touchdowns. I guess that was the only downside for a guy who touched the ball as much as he did. But 1,800 receiving yards. He's a guy who's just going to be another top 3 fantasy wide receiver. He's always in that contention of which one do I go with, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, or Julio Jones. He's just in that tier.
Right. and
So.
it's fairly easy. No matter what, you're ending up with something pretty strong there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the passing game, overall, I am excited to see them trend upwards. I think because last year was such a kind of a downfall, it's not like they were bad, but there seems like they should go higher. It's not really saying, oh, well, there's nowhere to go but up, but they should go higher.
The volume will stay the same. I think the efficiency sees a boost.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree. As far as the running backs go, I mean, obviously Tevin Coleman, drafted last year, but Devontae Freeman really stole the show. And Freeman was a guy, he faded towards the end of the year, but obviously had those monster 3, 4, 5 weeks there in the middle of the season, which is kind of a dominant option because, one, he's so versatile as far as running the ball and working in the passing game.
Hi, I'm Ross, and I'm addicted to Tevin Coleman. Third rounder last year out of Indiana, just one of the most dominant running backs in college football over the last 10 years, along with Melvin Gordon, which we're still waiting on both of them to really do something. But, you go back to Tevin Coleman's big run against the Vikings last year. That pretty much defined it. Just an amazing 45-yard run that ends with Anthony Barr just knocking the ball out of his hands and him fumbling and falling over and the Falcons losing the ball. That was Tevin Coleman's rookie year where he just showed signs of like, oh, wow, this guy's awesome. And then you just can't keep him on the field because of mistakes. So he was awful in the receiving game as well. Caught 2 of 11 targets. So that's the thing with Freeman. I think he has a super high floor, one of the highest floor running backs in football, especially in your cash games week to week. Just that receiving game, he's so good in the receiving game. Even if Coleman comes in and is amazing at running the ball, Freeman still has such a solid role there. I'm not worried about him at all, and I think he's going to be a nice week-to-week cash game. But I will say, if Freeman gets banged up, or on weeks in good matchups, we're going to see some lines this year where Coleman has, 12 carries for 100 yards and maybe a touchdown or 2. So there are going to be games like that. That's the type of running back he is. There's also going to be games where he has 14 carries for 42 yards and no touchdowns. So, that's just what you're looking at. He's going to be a boom bust. He's going to be cheap. And that's going to be the Falcons running game this year. So I'm excited. I think it's going to be really solid. I think both of them could get 800, 900 rushing yards this year, but overall going to be a nice improvement.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement. I think both those guys are definitely going to have their place in the daily fantasy world this year. As far as looking at their strength of schedule goes, kind of middle of the road. They're going to have some tough weeks, just like the Saints that we talked about last. Obviously, facing Carolina twice. We're still. I'm a little hesitant to see how Carolina's defense is, so I'm not going to write that one up as a complete fade. But going and playing Seattle and Denver, that's something I'll probably stay away from.
Yeah, that's fair. I'd say that's worked out well for people fading those defenses the last 5 years?
Yeah, obviously Jones is a guy you can always give a look at just because he is one of those elite wide receivers. But as far as using the secondary guys, it's like, okay, maybe not.
Right.
And as far as this defense, there's one guy I really don't pick on, and that's Desmond Trufant. He was a guy that just quarterbacks did not throw against him because it was so easy to pick on the other side of the field. So it is one thing to kind of consider if that kind of shapes up to the same game plan for opposing teams.
Yeah, my friend Ian Wharton does a lot of quarterback he does this cornerback productivity thing where he looks at corners and grades their play. And he said he thinks Desmond Trufant's the best corner in the league. So, and you seem to agree with that. So, clearly there's something there. They're still waiting on Vic Beasley to become that sort of elite pass rusher, but overall, yeah, they should be better. Still weak in some areas, though.
Yeah, definitely. I think at this point in time, we can kind of put him as an average defense to target, but it could creep up to maybe, we'll hesitate maybe a little bit in certain weeks.
Right.
So that's going to wrap it up with our Falcons team preview. Be sure to check out the rest of our teams at dailyfantasycafe.com.